Hello and welcome to the second installment of the Leftynet Podcast. Today we're doing a collaboration with another right-wing podcast network, and I'll let them introduce themselves right now.
Yeah, we're the Real Talk podcast with Frank and Vishy, and we're collaborating with the Leftynet Podcast today. The topics include lefty poll, unite the right, and can the right and left work together? We'll start first with unite the right.
Yeah, so I think one of the more interesting things to come out of the Unite the Right is that, unlike other political protests that you see, maybe Berkeley or Hamburg, you don't really see any defined social victories. Like, I don't know how to explain it, or ideological victories. So, like, at Berkeley, it was more defined as you saw, like, more Antifa protesters show up and things like that. Of course, it was on a much larger schedule.
I don't know, dude. Like Berkeley, a lot of people would view that as the right winning. And
I mean, I wasn't saying that the Antifa was winning, but it was like a lot bigger. It was a lot more defined on what it was. Unlike from what I've seen of Charlottesville, where it's just general kind of like what when it comes to like the actual status.
I also don't know if Berkeley was like, clear cut, just far right. It was more like, Trump supporters. There's some far right, Trump, thrown in there. But, in this one, obviously, I wouldn't say the people there exactly reflected my views. I mean, I'm cultural nationalist. I wouldn't exactly say I'm like ethno-nationalist, which majority of people here at this one would have been ethno-nationalist, except maybe make the exception for the Oath Keepers and 3%ers.
Yeah, Berkeley was a lot more just like, they were more just like the right-wing dweebs, not like the, hardliners. And what I mean by that is they were like the kind of like Identity Europa guys. They were like just random or not even ethno-nationalists, just like, I don't know, a lot of internet right-wing dweebs came to there, whereas this Charlottesville was a bit more organized.
That one was just conservatives in general. It could have been ethno-nationalists, could have been anybody on the right. On this one here, there's actually somebody who went out and did a chart and said, okay, well, this many KKK people showed up, this many white nationalist people showed up, this many alt-right people showed up.
Right.
Then there's even one group called the Proud Boys, which is represented by Gavin McInnes, and the guy with Rebel Media in Canada and all that, and they're supposedly for Western civilization, but I mean, they're actually just the same.
I'd lump them into the dweebs category.
Yeah, I mean, and the big point I wanted to make about this, from what I heard, because I actually know someone who went there, who was there, and what they said was the alt-right and Richard Spencer is really what caused the police to get involved in the whole thing. They were resisting the police, and that's what caused the whole thing to become a huge mess, or at least part of what caused it. The alt-right people are kind of disorganized, and they didn't really hold their composure as much as the people who are used to this, the KKK people and the white nationalist people.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, you definitely saw more of a serious kind of tone to it, especially on the right-wing side when it comes to Charlottesville, comparatively to like all other recent major protests, like Berkeley.
Oh, but they were planning this for a long time. I mean, I followed this just as a hobby on the side, just this, how this stuff has evolved from 2007, and man, it's really, really grown, especially because of the alt-right, which is kind of just a bunch of disorganized young kids with a few top people controlling it. What do you call those guys? Amren. Those
yeah,
kind of leading the show.
Yeah, it seems like it was a serious event instead of just like a kind of general discontent protest.
It's always surprised me to find out that there are, self-proclaimed and actually recognized alt-right leaders, because the whole movement, it seems like disjointed and just kind of like an online thing for very online people.
Yeah, it's mostly younger people. I mean, you basically got your virgins, teenagers to the 30s, and then you got some people who are 40 plus and probably still virgins.
Well, I think there's some other reasons to it as well. Like I'd say one of the reasons is that when people think of the alt-right, sometimes they also include the libertarians, the conservatives, the Republicans, like the whole right, pretty much. and it's more, not necessarily liberals. But I think what makes them different from like the Berkeley protests with Antifa is that especially within leftist groups, and primarily the anarchist ones, they have a very easy time to collaborate with each other, and so especially the anarchists, and they tend to be way more towards action in their ideology. But I think one of the issues about it too is that usually it doesn't really have that much of an impact. People don't really take it that seriously, especially like syndicalist organization. It hasn't really happened anything big from it yet. Many leftist friends that I have would argue against that, but in difference to maybe more like right-wing demonstrations, they have a more explosive spread. So, like, I can give a few examples to that. Being in Sweden, in Stockholm, there's been protests, especially from more liberal, left-leaning, organizations or a group of people, and sometimes it has been taken to call to action. But it wasn't until like last year that there were about 500. So like there's the resistance movement, which would be like Stormfront, pretty much the Swedish version, and it went from like 20 people to 500 in like a couple of years, all because of Trump or whatever. So see, like with the Occupy Wall Street, which had way more leftists than just Antifa participate, and well, more as in like I guess like in reaction to the global recession, or primarily like the crash in 28. But that was more. There were a lot more ideological reasons, I'd say, like that were strictly tied to the economic issue. Now with this, since it's identitarian, it's not just so much about the economical ones, and there's quite a lot of conflict going on between, like, especially in identity politics. So these people are extremely disagreeing with each other and have very violent tendencies, especially looking at, uh, well, like especially looking at the liberals that are now called fascists by the real fascists or whatever. And
Fascism.
Well, I
yeah,
wouldn't agree that they're called the real fascists because they kind of laugh at that. It's more like the conservatives calling them that. I don't know if
yeah,
Sweden
it's just funny.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm going off topic here with following you on that though, but Amren also used to be really tiny in 1994, and now it's huge in the last 2 years since the election. And I think that a lot of this ID poll is kind of going across both sides of the Atlantic now too. A large amount of people on both sides are joining these groups in high numbers.
Yeah, and it's actually that's one of the things that I've seen a lot on media. Usually, I don't really follow these things. I catched up some of the information that someone died, a car came crashing in, a helicopter was downed,
Yeah,
and
I don't know if all that information's even still out. I know that the car crash was a young alt-rightist who was 20. His mom didn't even know it was she thought he was going to a Trump rally, and the
yeah,
police helicopter was trying to get like video or something of the scene or something of that sort, and crashed by accident. I think that's what I think.
yeah, exactly. Although like a lot of people are reporting, well, violence and like people getting injured. I think it was like 20 people got injured or something,
Yeah,
and it's not that usual.
you also
No.
see, you also
That's
saw
a French or Greek thing.
Yeah,
That kind of stuff happens in France and Greece, not in the U.S.
yeah, this is probably one of the closest things we've gotten to a Greek protest.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
We're not levels of Molotov cocktails at cops yet, but
I mean, people think America's a big bad place, but that's really only when it comes to crime.
yeah, I think when it actually looking at this, you saw quite a lot more radical overt action I mean, historically, you saw fights and, whatever on a small scale, with the majority of whatever
Well,
being
yeah.
organized on the side. But with this, you saw way more violent things. I mean, you saw the I don't even know if it had a separate name, but the protest for the Confederate statue,
which
with
I
the
don't,
tiki torches.
Yeah, I didn't really disagree with the whole premise of protesting against. I don't believe in revisionist history, and I know a lot of people like Petit Bourgeois, who's also in your Leftynet group. They didn't believe that removing the statue was a great idea or anything. Yeah? But the people who went and actually protested it, majority of us regular conservatives, even down to the really, really hardcore cultural nationalist ones, aren't going to necessarily go stand with these white nationalists because we don't want to be associated with them.
Yeah, exactly. I think one important thing to point out is that, again, like when I was looking at the media, one thing that I was seeing a lot was that people from all sides, even like Sam Harris and all these like centrist people, started commenting on it and saying that, well, all identity politics is bad, but white nationalism or white id pol is the worst, or whatever. So people from all across the political spectrum are clearly opposing this type. But I think like what I think is kind of sticking out from this situation is that in the past, we've seen right-wing organizations have demonstrations and have like an uprising, especially in Europe, northern parts of Europe, and also southern parts with the Golden Dawn in Greek.
Golden Dawn was Greece, yeah.
Yeah, but this is more refined. And what I mean by that is that this is kind of like people all across like the right-wing ideologies, like the libertarians or whatever.
I think it's different because there's a group in Sweden, right? There's some sort of Nord group, like
the Nordic resistance movement, I think.
Yeah, those guys. But I think this is different because there's alt-right, which is like the gateway to that now.
Yeah, exactly. But they also
much more people in that one.
Yeah, much more people. And like I saw, I'm still a bit confused about all the information. I don't want to blindly trust any source, really.
Right.
But what I do see is that it wasn't really that violent in the beginning of the protest. It was more like when Antifa came and started throwing rocks. That's where it started to boil down.
Antifa was also making homemade, like those spray cans. They're making flamethrowers and stuff.
Yeah, it was insane. But like, I think it's mainly
they're making things worse, is my opinion. Please continue.
Yeah, I don't think like mainly Antifa. They haven't really been so much against right wingers as they've been against. Sorry, there's a deer outside my window. I'm kind of distracted. So much against like Nazism or like
actual racism, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that has kind of been watered down, obviously. But you can definitely see that there would be some very violent reactions towards this. But what I think it is too is that they're more talking about another type of violence, maybe indirectly, maybe they're not even conscious or aware of it, but like the types of like oppression, for example, like people are calling them out on hypocrisy or whatever, like, oh, imagine if you actually had experienced oppression or systematic violence or whatever. And I can see that argumentation going on. I think that's kind of irrelevant, though.
You mean like Antifa has never actually experienced oppression themselves?
No, like people would say that, and like
they would say that of the alt-right people.
Yeah, of the alt-right, like more the white nationalists or whatever. But they are like they clash very hard, obviously. But I think it's interesting, like because
I can tell you that if Antifa wanted to attack real Nazis this time, they definitely attack much closer to what real Nazis are.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Can I speak about Antifa as a tactic?
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. It's not, as far as I can understand, in its entirety, it's not, as you probably understand, it's probably not, you understand it's not like a real organization with a leader or leaders.
No, of course.
So it's a tactic
Well, there
And the
are.
way it's viewed is that this demonstration was threatening the community of Charlottesville. And so these people took up to defend that community. And there were, after the protest itself, reported by people I know who were there, and that's the best source I'm going to get. There were threats by probably the more hard line of the right-wing protesters towards, communities within Charlottesville of color. And there was, in fact, an instance where injured left-wing counter-protesters were brought to a Methodist church and assaulted, or the church was assaulted by the Nazis.
Didn't like there was they like surrounded a group of like around some statue. Like I heard that somewhere.
I mean,
I think it was the local college. Had like maybe 23 people.
Well, you're talking about the night. If you're talking about the night before,
Yeah,
then Antifa was heavily outnumbered.
Yeah, where it was like 16 people versus like maybe 150.
Yeah.
Around the statue. But I mean,
Yeah,
you saw, you saw like essentially, people. I know people got beaten by poles. Like
both sides
poles.
actually got beaten by poles.
Yeah, both sides got beaten by poles, and I know both sides got bear maced. You also saw people.
Well, that's not hard to buy.
Yeah. You also saw people, using like, I can't like shitty aerosol cans.
Yeah, the flamethrowers, the aerosol flamethrowers. Basically.
Yeah, the aerosol flamethrowers, and
I
well.
heard it was only Antifa doing that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I know both sides were using bear mace
definitively. I mean, my personal belief is that nobody. I heard that Antifa attacked first. I have no clue who attacked first in reality, but I know there's going to be a lot of he said, she said sort of stuff because I know the black guy who got beaten with poles. They said, oh well, he was attacking someone before, so it was self-defense, and maybe they went overboard on that. And then I heard that when the police dispersed the protesters, the fascist ones, or what do you want to call them, they dispersed them into a crowd of Antifa who started beating them with poles. But, I think the best solution to this would have just let them go do their little thing. Yeah. I guess I know it's in the middle of a town square, so it's probably bad. But, go let them go do their little thing and then not attract so much publicity. Then nobody probably would have died. That being said, I know the alt-right is probably a little more out of control than the other groups who are used to doing these kind of protests. And maybe the alt-right would have been violent anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, another important thing to understand is that when a protest like this, or a demonstration like this, like Unite the Right, is allowed to happen somewhere, you have to understand the threat that is felt by that community, especially the people who are like, when you have KKK marching in your town, what demographics do you think are going to feel threatened by that, and how do you expect them to react? In a perfect world, you'd want them to just, sit back and ride it out, I guess.
There's also the fact that, from what I understand, like there was no, like they didn't give the community a heads up. Like this was a total like no one was warned about it. Like they didn't plan it. They didn't like call sort of like the town or anything.
I thought they had a permit.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
They
they
did
did
get
get
it.
Oh, they didn't get one? I thought they had one.
Oh,
No,
wait,
they
but
did have one.
Oh, they did have one.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
see, they don't need to warn the community if they already have a permit, though. That's the thing.
I've heard that they didn't have a permit.
No, they had a permit. I heard that they
the
had a
police would've
permit.
shut
No,
police
for
would've shut it down fast if they
demonstrations
didn't
like
have
this,
one.
you always need a permit. Like for for like the whole big women's marches thing, like they all needed permits for even smaller things. Like you need permits. Like if you're doing marches, those take long times to set up, so the police don't come and shut you down.
Right.
I mean, like,
I don't know how
Science
reputable
marches,
of a,
like those
of
need
a
permits.
yeah, I don't know how reputable of a source it is, but I heard that from Richard Spencer's Twitter that they were being pushed off of the track that
everybody-
they were permitted on.
I mean, I wouldn't listen to anything Richard Spencer says. All sides hate Richard Spencer, and all sides blame the alt-right, so...
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. Okay.
Like,
Even
Richard
getting-
Spencer just
I'm
yeah.
kind of curious though. Like personally, I don't really care so much about like the minor details or whatever, since most of it's kind of predictable. Because like when I see what people write on medias, they're not really talking about really what went down, like what they did, but more what they represented symbolically. And I feel like, in difference to the more identitarian leftist politics, or doesn't have to be economically, even though it is, especially with the Black Panthers. But regardless, like when it's for Black Lives Matter, for example, people are not necessarily always that much outraged of what they are representing symbolically. Obviously, Paul would have a problem with that, or other ones that are, well, like ethno-nationalists, but generally it's that they're so incredibly violent and they cause a lot of harm to people,
Right.
innocent
Right, that's
people. But in this case, even though there was some, like not casualties, but there was some people who got injured, and like of course people have a problem with that. But I think more they're talking about something that is more like meta, like something that is more yeah, like something that is more sublime, I guess, and that would be like systematical violence, and they use that a lot, especially in like constructivist thinking that a lot of feminists use, especially third wave feminists, which is like, yeah, like you can be called a racist, for example, just by being a white man with a high income or whatever, and you can't, like that type of thinking.
And the thing is that they're extending that to Asians and Jews now, saying, "Oh, well, you know what? You guys are minorities, but you're privileged, so you're just the same thing too."
It's
Oh,
really-
yeah.
It's devolved into something horrible. I mean, the idea, I think.
Yeah,
what
I mean, a
you're
lot of
going
Jews
for-
in England are voting conservative now because the Labour Party is the party of they're saying this party of Islam. So I mean,
Yeah,
or
well,
Sharia.
I don't know
Like the Labour Party
anyone in the UK who would believe that, who has like a functioning brain, but okay.
I mean, you have. You're not seeing that on a large scale at all. What you're seeing then are from the loud, open, like historical UKIP voters, that just want to like openly oppose something. But I think you're definitely. I think the word that Angry was looking for, by the way, was intersectionality.
Oh yeah, exactly, intersection.
Which was originally the whole entire point of intersectionality, was to be able to realize that everybody's viewpoints are entirely subjective to their identity, and then everybody's viewpoint dependent. And this is really shitty because it's late and I'm tired, but that everybody's viewpoint is entirely subjective to their identity. That's devolved, 10, 20 years later, from being that to being entirely the antithesis of what they were going for. You see an extreme discrimination of minorities that were originally considered to be, these groups of people who were underprivileged comparatively to percentile majorities like whites and things like that. But now you're seeing people who are like openly against, I don't know, like Asians, like you said, or whatever, or people who are even aligning themselves to their movement. White people who are aligning themselves to these predominantly people of color movements. They're even going against them. So you're seeing this kind of devolvation from this community to just absolute like shitstorm.
Yeah, like one thing that it's not really one thing, but looking at this for over the course of like 2 years, from what I've seen, like especially from the left liberal side, but like the intersectional like feminist left or whatever, the deconstructivists that I like to call them, they weren't really seen as a threat. They were more like annoying to people, or like stupid, or
The intersectionalist movements.
yeah, the intersectionalist movement. There were some people like that would call them destroying the Western civilization, and then you have people like Jordan Peterson, a psychologist, that would that would criticize this like sort of neo-Marxist, postmodernist thinking, and that it actually is destroying the Western civilization. But generally, people have more ridiculed them and seen them as
Are you saying that P.T.
distraction.
Jorgensen is against it, or
He's against like neo-Marxist, or he calls it that, postmodernist thought, and that includes like intersectionalist, third wave feminism, etc.
The cultural Marxists are transsexualizing my children.
Yeah, something like that.
Isn't Marxist though usually opposed to some of these ideas though? Isn't it?
Yeah, they
cultural
are.
Marxist? That's more. This is more like a cultural Marxism sort of situation, right?
Yeah, like also I think there's quite a lot of good videos, by the way, now that debunk a lot of these like common ideas about cultural Marxism, but it's more of a term that you can use within certain contexts. It doesn't have anything to do with Marxist ideology or economic.
Well, usually when it's used in the context of extremely social liberals.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah, it has nothing to do with actual leftism normally. It's just like,
I mean, we would
like-
just call it cultural Marxist, which has nothing to do with actual Marxism, really.
yeah, I
know.
think that's good to distinguish.
I
But
doesn't really like it, but
yeah, but
sorry.
what I would see, like in contrast to that, like with the with intersectionalist movement, you would see like on the right, there would actually be a threat to people. That not that they objectively would be, but they would perceive it as an actual threat to civilization, and that's what you see today when you go onto like any type of social media. Sam Harris or like any celebrity that is more liberal left, they would comment on that. A lot of right wingers as well, and they would say that they are specifically opposed to IDPOL. And what they mean by that is that they are against identitarian politics that involve anything that would be like perceived as racism or like not really sexism, but you get it. Like there are some real consequences of these ideologies, and like if you really want a good example of that, you can look in Greece, for example. They had a very difficult situation with a lot of unemployment, a lot of depression, a lot of problems with drugs in Athens, and there was a lot of immigration too. And obviously, seeing this like social disparity and like, just complete chaos, these types of groups would arrive. And like I've looked at some of their stuff, and it's pretty. It's not only like just identitarian politics, but it's also it's more than just ethno-nationalism. There is clearly something more idealistic about this that is very similar to something like Nazi Germany.
is this, you're referring to BNP?
I'm referring to the Golden Dawn in Greece that had
Oh, shit, I thought-
yeah.
The Golden Dawn's kind of out of the picture for right now, though.
Yeah, there
I'd
was
say
a point.
Identity Europa and a lot of anti-migrant groups are what's bringing up, and Lauren Southern is kind of like this person who is conservative, but trying to like bridge the gap between identitarianism and conservatism, so he doesn't come out as identitarianism, and that's like she's driving a lot of people towards that area.
Yeah,
These people are like pretending to not be like basically WN, so that it's more acceptable for other people to kind of follow them in that direction and sort of lead them with shot. Because I heard that Amren and Jared Taylor, who are the big movements on the alt-right, are trying to grab liberals too, like people who support Bernie Sanders. It's part of the
They're pulling for that classical liberal Dave Rubin crowd.
Exactly.
I was wondering, is Dave Rubin kind of alt-right now?
Dave. Okay. Here's the thing about Dave Rubin. Do you remember when there was that big YouTube wave like several years ago of just like the rational skeptic community?
Yeah, I remember.
They were never like they're that like classical liberal thing. They believe in like just very strongly, and they adhere to like the core values of the Constitution for whatever reason. They just pull on that a lot.
Exactly.
And they're absolutist about it.
They know a lot of people respect that. So
yeah, that's the thing. I think that's their whole rhetorical strategy. Is like they, especially in America,
they have different strategies. They have different strategies to get regular conservatives, on the bandwagon. They have different strategies now to get far left liberals on the bandwagon. Like they come up with different strategies to get everybody to go on their side.
I don't think they have many far left liberals, but they have a lot of liberals. They have a lot of Clintonite liberals on their side.
Well, they don't. A lot of them don't really like social liberals. They don't really like. They're okay with like maybe economic liberals with some of the workers' policies, but they don't really like social liberals. But some of the social liberals, some of the homosexual ones, especially in different parts of Europe, oppose Muslim immigration, for example, and they realize in a lot of countries that aren't Western and not white majority tend to discriminate against groups that are homosexual or support some of these socially liberal policies. So they end up saying, okay, well, you know what, we might be socially liberal, but we should be pro-white, because in all the countries that aren't pro-white, they're not going to respect our opinions, especially the Muslim ones. So that's how they're hoping to get more people on the bandwagon, according to Jared Taylor from American Renaissance when he was on the show on Red Ice.
I'd say this. All of this is more like alt-light in the sense that there isn't really this heavy emotional anchor of like I guess not hatred, but like I'd say it's more of a realistic criticism towards immigration that a lot of these people are looking into, and there's a lot of people on the right that agree with this, and it's culturally, it's economically. I wouldn't necessarily say it's all that much about like white nationalism or whatever. It's
Not
more
with those
of a-
people, no.
No, exactly. And like this is the kind of audience
But
that like,
I do think
pandering to.
I do think ultimately that's where those ideas will lead.
Yeah.
When you start vehemently opposing immigration, from like you start at the standpoint where you're like, oh yeah, let's be I'm going to be rational about this, and I'm going to like do a cost benefit analysis. I'm going to see where these people come from, and yada yada yada.
So
And
it's quite. Yeah, exactly.
Well, some of the intersectionality is driving away a lot of the far liberals too, and then causing them to go full circle and go to the far right. I don't really think everybody on the alt-right, because I'm on the alt-right as well, is going to go to the alt-right, especially since there's a good deal of people on the alt-right who are going to also be minorities.
I feel I actually want to say something about this, seeing that there's a huge uprising among immigration like skeptic or like people who criticize the immigration policy of Sweden. And they're approaching a very large minority, and the Sweden Democrats, which are, I would call them, I would just call them conservatives, really, like the Tea Party, pretty much.
They're pretty much Tea
And
Party, in my opinion.
yeah, and there was a point where they had about like 20% of the expected votes, and they had a possibility of becoming the biggest party. That is not very realistic now, from what I understand. There's been a lot of backlash, but the fact that there was this kind of like protest against the situation, there was a time where the Swedish government almost got. And when I say almost, I mean there was a possibility that it happened. If the right-wing coalition agreed to it, they could have had overthrown the Swedish government, the Social Democrats and the liberal left or whatever. But
I wouldn't really call the Social Democrats exactly racist. I'm sure there's racist elements around it, but I mean, I would just say they're anti-immigration. You're saying anti-immigration and racist is the same thing?
No. I'm talking about the Swedish Democrats. The Swedish Democrats are conservative. They are fiscally right wing.
Right.
They're in comparison to like the other right wing parties, they are primarily social liberals. I looked into this recently,
really?
and yeah, to actually call the mixed economy we have today. Looking at the reformist policies of the Social Democrats, they are, of course, Social Democrats. But in reality, if this stagnates, so you might as well just call it a social liberal economy, because we've had a lot of immigration, a lot of private industry, and we've had a lot of economical uprising, and people are generally not trying to remove the markets or whatever.
Right.
And there's been like a lot of divisions even within the Social Democrats, since a lot of people do not want to move further to the left, but like the Sweden Democrats, I don't want anyone to get like a weird perception that they are not like right wing. They're as far as alt right you can become, pretty much, without becoming like actual Nazis or ethno nationalists or whatever. And to see them having like 20% of the votes, it's pretty like weird for a country like Sweden.
Well, I mean, I don't think a lot of people are going to want to change the systems in a lot of Europe because a lot of people support the systems, especially in Northern European countries, especially I'd say in Sweden.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people do have an issue with the sort of uncontrolled, in a lot of our opinions, although most of us here, I'm sure, live in the United States, immigration that we see in Europe.
Yeah, I
think
see
that's
that
kind
a
of a
lot.
natural. I kind of expected that to be sort of a natural reaction.
Yeah, of course. What is interesting though, which I think is interesting, is that, and there's been a lot of right wingers that have reported on this, and it's that, and you can all, of course, disagree with me, but from explicitly an economical point of view, it doesn't really make sense to say that immigration or whatever is necessarily bad for the economy. What is bad for the economy and
It's
for
not bad
the
for
nation?
economy, that's for
Yeah,
sure. Most of the people.
there's a lot of people that might have this like misconception. I think a lot of
I think the issue here isn't, or when people say that it's bad for the economy. It's
yeah,
usually good
I
for
think
the-
the issue is identitarian.
Yeah,
Is
it's
what
really-
people want to get to.
Yeah, no, like you said, it's
Well-
good for the economy, but you end up
Yeah.
running into the issue of the actual people who are refugees becoming unemployed and
Yeah,
in
exactly.
a bad
Yeah, a lot
situation.
of them end up on welfare. That's the thing. A lot of them
Yes,
end up
so-
on welfare. You get these ghettos, and then they don't assimilate.
Well,
So I'll
it's a
give,
combination of issues. I think a good example is in Germany, where they've built mass complexes built for refugees, where they haven't moved any refugees in, and the companies are still profiting off of them.
I'd just
all
like to
these
sum it up
companies-
in one sentence, and it's that you cannot, you cannot have a welfare state with open borders.
Right.
It's not possible. And what I'm saying, it doesn't really make sense for a lot of these right wingers to turn to the Sweden Democrats out of economical issues, which would be their main motive if you look at it from like our past history.
But isn't the Sweden Democrats aren't they looking to put controls on the immigration? Isn't that one of their big points?
Yes, of course, but here's the issue, right? It's a right-wing party. It's not a social liberal party. They want to decrease spending, and maybe they're more right-wing than some of the other parties. And you can see that this is a populist party, since they would do
So fiscally, they're also going to change things.
they are right-wing. So like it doesn't really make sense looking at like the party leader for the right-wing coalition in Sweden, Alliansen, the alliance,
Which
with
is actually the name of a Norwegian party that's actually
Yeah,
called
yeah.
on the far right. Yeah.
though they've been ruling for like 8 years, and like before 2014 where the Social Democrats took over. But essentially what he wanted to do was that to have open borders and move towards a free market economy. And eventually, if people wanted to, he wanted to deconstruct the welfare state. And a lot of people didn't want this, so
Right.
naturally it became Social Democrat again. But the point is that the issues didn't necessarily arise out of left-wing economical issues. It was that the open borders plus the welfare state that they were unable to remove directly because of our indirect democracy, you would see these issues arise because of this reason. And it would only make sense for the Sweden Democrats to put a restriction on immigration if they wanted to implement a system that is pretty much social liberalism and keep the welfare state. So I might actually be wrong. They might actually be for the welfare state, but there's so many weird things going on, seeing how much they vote for all of these like right-wing policies, and there's a lot of inconsistencies. So like obviously they are just a populist party, but I understand why
So
people
they're
vote
not
for it.
united. They're kind of like, well, I don't know. I'm just gonna say that they're not really united on this particular point, which is similar to kind of like the Alternative for Deutschland, which was trying to become the major, opposition in Germany to the Christian Democrats, but then their party leader didn't like where the party was going, and there's just a huge argument.
Yeah, like I think again, like the focus here is the identitarian thing, because like Germany is a right-wing country.
Right. So it's conservatives fighting identitarians, basically, like regular conservatives fighting identitarians.
So I don't think at all the focus is on free market economy or anything like that. That would actually be for open borders immigration. It's more of the welfare state that people should be opposed to if they are to be consistent. The identitarian thing is more an issue in a welfare state, or because then you have people in these suburbs in these very secluded ghettos, and they live off of welfare, and there's a lot of issues with it, and we have it a lot here, but it doesn't really make sense for me to see that so much in America.
No, I
It's
think we're
more,
very different places. America's
yeah,
built on immigration. Sweden has like really successful Iranian, and I've heard there's some
oh yeah,
successful Pakistani
definitely.
groups and stuff. But then they didn't have totally open borders like they have now, as far as I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Like porous borders.
Well, now we actually close the borders. It's quite. I
know
don't want to
Norway and
focus too
Denmark
much on it.
have been more like closed border and have had much stricter policies.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
haven't ended up having them as much of an issue as Sweden. Man, but I mean, I've watched documentaries on Sweden and how you guys have a gender neutral pronoun called hen.
Oh yeah, we do. We do have that.
It's-
We're a very socially liberal country,
Right,
extremely
right.
socially
I
liberal.
think that's been used for over maybe like 20 years now.
Yeah, definitely. No, not hen. That was came a couple of years ago, I think. But like I'll give an example. If I go to my high school, like back in the day, I would receive a feminist book as a departure gift, and every school in Sweden would get that. So they do have like these things they want to spread, like to the kids, to the impressionable generation. There is a certain ideological agenda that they do want to spread. So there's nothing. It's all transparent, really. There's nothing to hide. We have public service. They are ideologically left wing for the most part and socially liberal. There's nothing to be disclosed, really. There
Which I
is
think a lot
censorship.
of people straight from much more patriarchal societies take huge advantage of, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's
definitely.
one of the big issues that you guys have over there. And
So, like,
what I also wanted to make just before was that with this mass migration, before I forget, I remember that they went on the streets and a lot of the migrants also opposed this mass migration, and then some of the groups that were there in Germany, like in the Yazidi group, they didn't, they weren't supportive. They're like, okay, well now you guys are importing our enemies from the Middle East to Germany, so why did we even like escape the Middle East in the first place?
Most of the Yazidis have fled towards Kurdish land, with quite a few of them being radicalized and then given training on how to defend themselves with guns and stuff. I'd like to just clarify that the majority of people, especially all the populous areas, not counting Idlib or Homs or like that, the civil war is over for a lot of people. And if you look at recent migration trends, you've seen loads of refugees flooding back into Syria.
oh yeah,
as they've been able to return to these areas because they're no longer in direct conflict.
But a lot of other refugees use the whole crisis as an excuse. So a lot of those people who went over weren't even Syrians in some cases.
Are you sure?
Yeah, you're not going to have people using this migration crisis, especially to a large extent. You'll see radicalization after approaching Germany, because there are quite a lot of Salafist mosques in Germany. But you're not going to see people already pre-radicalized using these transports or these waves. It's much simpler to use already existing human migrant tracks, like from Libya or Tunisia to Italy.
But I'm just saying, like a lot of the migrants, claim to be Syrian. Whichever route they use, they claim to be Syrian when they went over. But I guess you're referring to the one from Turkey, right, into Europe.
What, the trail? Not the
Yeah,
trail,
you're saying the Syrians really just use the trail from Turkey, not the one from Libya.
No. If you're gonna, what I'm saying is that to see like this really high rate of radicalized kind of
Islamist immigration. You're going to see it from places like the Libyan migrant
Yeah,
tracks.
exactly.
You're not going to see it
Well,
from these mainstream areas.
well,
The reason why, well, the
so
reason,
none of the radicalized ones would be coming in from Turkey.
well, the radicalized ones aren't necessarily coming in from Turkey. It's people fleeing and then being radicalized. You're not going.
Oh yeah, that's probably also true. But I mean,
the reason why you're not going to see these already radicalized people using these common routes is because there's really no way to do it anymore. I mean, if you look at the the geography of ISIS at the moment, they've been pushed out of almost, everything. So it not only is it a lot more difficult for them to get into those areas, but it's a lot easier to get into areas using these human migrant trails, and not be immediately found, which allows for a lot more things. Because the popular rail or trail that people use from Turkey is already known, and you have people, at these areas. You're not going to see main ISIS members. You're going to see them going through much more secretive, and even plane tickets, and going to already radicalized people. It's not just like they're walking.
I mean, it's part of the ISIS and several other terrorist organizations' strategies to mix themselves in with the migrants, so they've kind of openly sort of found that up and said that, though. But I think my concern also is not just the terrorism, and I think a lot of other people just concern themselves with the terrorism, and lots of other groups have already kind of one-upped this, especially the white identity ones, and said, well, we're not just concerned with terrorism, we're also concerned by the high levels of crime. Like in Sweden, I heard it doubled the crime, and then of course...
Yeah, that is exactly. It's not just not just culture. It is culture.
That's another piece. We didn't mention culture too.
Yeah, like when I say identitarian, I mainly suggest that this type of culture clash is not just going to lead to social issues, but also it will have a lot of consequences like increased crime. Now, that will not necessarily always impact the economy negatively, but like it's not just culture necessarily. It can become a very unpleasant place to live in generally.
Its economic impact is only if they're actually like working though and contributing to the economy.
Yeah.
If some of them are on welfare, then it's only contributing to the the shelter, the economy of the shelters and the migrants. That's the only thing that's really contributing. And,
See, like, yeah.
I was just gonna say, there's like, with the whole culture thing, people might be committing, crimes by accident. Obviously, some of them are definitely purposely. And then you also do have people who, I've heard a big one that they bring up is that there's a lot of public defecation and stuff going on, and because people don't know where to do it and all kinds of different stuff. Because we've got people coming in that are also just, they're from, maybe less, wealthy backgrounds and stuff like that, and they just don't know. Yeah.
I think like I really want to get into some interesting AI topics, which is like, and it's something that I've thought about a lot recently as well, seeing like the potential of people, from both sides going against identity politics. Like again, it doesn't have to be this very like racist or negative tone towards the origin of these people. It's more how do we deal with these people? Like, do we have a welfare state? Like, I think if people were a lot more honest about what they actually wanted to achieve, then these issues would probably not arrive, I think. And like, I think what would be great if people would like collaborate in some extent is to focus a lot more on objectivity. And what I mean by that is that, especially within journalism, there is a lot of censorship, just looking at Sweden. And it's very hard to express or share any kind of like statistics you might have as an economics professor or like a journalist. And there's a lot of threats doing that. And there's always some sort of assumed agenda, and people are generally afraid to do that. But I don't think that should be a problem at all. in fact, if there is a flaw within the system, like let's say, for example, if I call myself a leftist, and I can still be very critical to a lot of these issues.
But I think that's a very Swedish sort of thing where it's a lot of censorship. I don't think in America we really have that kind of censorship.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
You have censorship, but it's on a much more peer-pressured level.
We have censorship, but it's through
Yeah.
the flooding of information rather
Yeah, like,
than the
I
hiding
think-
of information.
Yeah.
In America, I
Probably.
think economically speaking, politically speaking, what I don't like about it, and what I see, there's a lot of potential where people can unite and like make things more democratic. I think a lot of people in general, I say majority of people are for democracy, and I think it's good if we keep it that way, if that's what we want, instead of like slowly tearing down democracy. There's been a lot of people that are claiming this is happening, and I'm not necessarily just talking about corruption or whatever. You can look at some of the leaders, and
I think we're still a ways from that. I mean, we do have like things like the Patriot Act and sort of things like that.
yeah.
I think there's a much more censorship in Europe than there is in the U.S.
Yeah.
I definitely think in Sweden that definitely should be an effort to push away the censorship. I think, and as far as economics is concerned, I'm a libertarian, but I think if Sweden works best with a welfare state, which I think it works fine, then that's fine as long as there's all this crazy mass immigration. And I think free market works well for the U.S. That's why a lot of people come over here in the first place.
Yeah, I can understand that point of view.
Yeah, and immigration feeds that.
I think.
But like
the
what
reason
I'm
why-
concerned with is that it's not necessarily really free market either. America, like there's a lot of
no.
issues.
It's not. There's issues for sure. I
and-
definitely think that there's an oligarchy in the United States, and true free market is not really allowed to reign.
What sort of like what I stand is that I'm generally opposed
like
to
to-
systems that are deemed to create this kind of
I'd like to point
systematical.
something out about the free market. Once you notice the oligarchy in America, you start to see, if you dig a little deeper, how the idea of a free market using a state system and using also a non-state system starts to kind of dissolve. You have this oligarchy of people who are, for their self-preserved interests. I mean, almost every single politician has their own personal interests that they pursue. Once you notice the oligarchy in America, you start to see how the free market and using a state system and even decentralized starts to dissolve. You have this kind of, you have politicians, almost all politicians, have their own personal gain to get out of something that they use. No politician is clear of that, especially in a capitalist system. But you said that the free market isn't really allowed to roam in America. And really, when it comes to it, systems like this are probably, without devolving into extreme libertarian kind of, end cap zone, is the closest that you're going to get to an actual working free market system. And
Memes.
Well, then my issue with that, and this is just my personal opinion, is that I don't want to support a system if this is the way it's approaching. Because from what I understand, and this is some discussions I've had with a lot of other left-wing people, and generally what I've seen some right-wing people are talking about is that not only do people want this, but it does appear that what system is winning is not democratic, liberal democracy. What is winning is authoritarian capitalism. And that's what we're seeing generally in Russia, in China. And that is not a good sign if that we're approaching something.
I can tell you one positive about authoritarian capitalism in a sense. I mean, in a sense, China kind of I guess that was more state-planned capitalism, but I mean that's how China kind of moved way ahead. But I mean America's kind of already developed, so if it moved to authoritarian.
Well, how's the economic equality in China looking?
Well, hold on.
Well, it's that part's not good, but I mean it gets you from undeveloped to developed pretty fast.
Well, this is how this
India.
works.
Well, I played a lot of Civ.
But no. So how that works is, yeah, authoritarian capitalism is great at moving up productivity rates, using sweatshops and extremely forced labor. I mean, if you look at China, you have, China's government and economic situation is the definition of a bribe. I mean, you have people working for like 2 cents, or like 23 cents an hour, or a day, or whatever, in sweatshops, producing $400, $500 goods to be exported and not kept in their own country. But
it does have a growing middle class, though.
It has a growing middle class.
Is that really a sign of like anything good?
Because
and also let's not forget that in doing all of this, China practically destroyed their air quality and are now like having to bend up their own ass and fix it.
I think the whole China thing is going to collapse, to be honest, because I don't think China's investments were sound. They made all these cities, which I don't think they're going to end up filling.
See, like this is an interesting discussion.
They're losing their manufacturing industry to a lot of other poor countries. Yeah, and I think we've gotten way off topic, but
no, like what I think is there's like a communist philosopher, psychoanalysis guy called Slavoj Žižek, and in one of his books, or like what he usually says in his lectures now, is an expression he uses, the light at the end of the tunnel is the oncoming train from the opposite direction. And I think what he means by that, and it's something that I can generally say too, I wouldn't actually mind a lot of like liberal democracies if they would continue on to be like this. Now, me being a pessimist, I think what is going to happen, and I think this is the oncoming train, so to say, is that what we're going to see is a lot more authoritarian capitalist systems, and that might be an issue. We might, and saying like,
I think whether Trump or Hillary won, we would have got that authoritarian capitalism you guys are talking about, kind of.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. It's just that the one that we have now has like a bit more right-wing flavor, and the one we would have had with Hillary would just have like a bit less right-wing flavor.
Left of center, I think.
Yeah. not more left-wing flavor, just less right-wing flavor.
It would also have been more socially liberal and more interventionist.
Yeah, definitely.
We had like more goddamn wars. I don't think.
No. Wait. I will tell you this. Just wait. Trump is not. He's not high and mighty enough to not be interventionist. He sent fucking 36 cruise missiles to, fucking Iraq.
He's
so that CNN would finally suck him off.
Well, that was Syria, and I think Trump is interventionist, but not to the level Hillary Clinton would have been. I mean, Hillary Clinton basically is the meaning of the word interventionist.
Well, I think what you'd see in the difference is that you'd see Hillary Clinton doing what Hillary Clinton did. It would be underground interventionist. Using more paid, things instead of actual.
Absolutely.
You would see a lot of those.
Yeah. So, like for Trump, you're going to see these cruise missiles, and these whatever. Or we'll use the cruise missiles as a metaphor now. You'll see cruise missiles, and that'll be his intervention. But you'd see Hillary, and you'd see, paid intervention by like some underground force.
Look at it this way. Look at history.
She'd be paying rebels all over the place.
And
if you look at history, just very recent history. George H.W. Bush, very like fucking loud intervention, like literally invades a country and carpet bombs a highway. Bill Clinton bombs a fucking ibuprofen plant. And then you have Obama also doing very quiet drone strikes, and Bush, it starts the fucking Iraq war.
Well, I mean, under Obama, the whole Libya thing happened, where they bombed.
Oh yeah, no, that as well.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a very loud like, oh yeah, here we go, America's
No,
getting
no,
into
it
it.
wasn't.
Bob's
It
point
wasn't.
here.
People think Bill Clinton did nothing actually, but Bill Clinton actually did a lot of the same stuff that Trump did. He just did.
No, he did. Yeah,
I think
Yeah.
I think
he's an asshole.
yeah, I think the point here is,
Well,
is that
all American politicians are, right?
I
I
think
know.
yeah, I think Bob's point here is that looking at any historical election, especially under a moderate to authoritarian capitalist country, you see that no matter what their, whatever they have, their actual political actions after they're elected will be an extreme conflict of interest with their campaign promises. You're never going to see a politician, especially an American politician, act differently in practice than anyone else because you have, like you said, an oligarchy that is undeniably, there that, you can't solve just by being president.
I mean, a lot of us on the right are praying that Trump isn't actually going to be, more interventions than he already is.
Yeah,
But,
I've seen
you
that
would,
a lot.
yeah, you would,
But
people
I
saying
actually-
4D chess and all kinds of stuff. Like, what?
I'm sorry to inform you that Raytheon is actually ultimately powerful and will win. know.
But I'd like to just quickly, because I had more to say on it. Going back to the authoritarian versus capitalist whatever benefit.
Yeah.
You see this extreme rise in productivity and economic growth, not only because of these things, of this rapid development, but you see them also actually go down from historical changes. I mean, looking at China, their GDP went up, their monetary value went up, but their overall standards of life went down and things like that.
Oh, really? I didn't know their standards of life went down.
Oh yeah, no, it's been kind of shit for a while now.
It's been really
You
shit,
see, the
yeah.
whole thing that people are thinking of, and I'm sure the World Bank and stuff, everybody has a stake in this whole deal. Actually, it's probably the World Bank's interest for these countries to stay poor so they become stay dependent on the World Bank. But the whole idea is that if the wealthier classes get all this money and they make all this money and all this productivity occurs, that slowly over time more and more people will climb up and they'll eventually get to the standard of living of the U.S. And I've heard it projected that China would have the U.S. standard of living by 2050.
You're not going to see that. I mean, as long as this level of exploitation exists, you're not going to see this.
Well, I mean, Japan did, but then kind of the U.S. sort of built Japan in a sense too.
China's entire economy exists on a system of very harsh exploitation to the point where the workers have almost zero rights. They're basically slaves.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I
would say that's everywhere, but I mean, I think you can agree that China is.
Oh, I don't think China has good environmental or human rights.
That's a result of their rapid development, though.
They're also warmongers.
Yeah, I mean, recently they've been warm, and historically as well, even going down to the Mao.
They had the Tang dynasty where they were enslaving people all the way in Iran.
I mean, you had the Tibetan invasion, and
Well, yeah, I mean, they had an empire that stretched all the way almost to Persia.
Oh yeah,
in one time.
You can talk about who.
They're about to colonize Indonesia at one point, but yeah.
Yeah, but no. So anyway, but you see that. I mean, you're going to see, no matter where you go, as technology rises, an increase in standard of living. I mean, a shitty country in the 1800s is gonna, or in the 2100s is gonna have a lot better standards of living by 1400 standards. So you're gonna see that general rise, but in proportion and
as
in
long as the
ratio.
government stays stable.
Well, no, in proportion and in ratio to first world countries, it's going to be extremely slow.
Right.
I think Rosa Luxemburg actually sums this up when she says by socially reforming things and by doing this, you're not actually changing anything. You're essentially just determining what size of breadcrumb you want. And by...
how would you say this is different than Japan, though? Because Japan went from totally backwards to...
I think the difference in Japan here is that it was a complete different scenario. Japan didn't go through this whatever. You had a relative stable system.
It was on the same level as Europe in a sense, I guess.
Well, no, you kept. I don't know how to word this, so I'm actually really bad with wording. The issue with Japan is that, during the U.S. occupation, it wasn't in the sense of, wanting this to already be like a worker exploited country. It was always kind of like a second world trading country. It wasn't industrial. I don't know how to word it, but
it wasn't really considered part of the second world. I don't think. I think it was considered part of the first world, even like before. Well, I guess that's Cold War though, isn't it? So that would have been after the American occupation.
Well, I think the whole point here is you had a general, completely 180 different approach to the politics of Japan post World War II than you did have China during Deng.
Well, I mean, I could give you a million examples. I mean, I can give you Kazakhstan, which has actually started to come up the First World too. I think maybe part of what's holding China back is it has a massive population, which would be hard for it to come up.
Well, the thing with the massive population is,
I think that's a good point, though.
Yeah.
With the massive population,
they have I think China's going to stagnate soon too, which is going to hurt it even more.
That's possible. But
I don't think that would necessarily hurt China as a population stagnation. That's what they've kind of been aiming for.
I meant an economic stagnation like Japan.
Oh, economic stagnation. Oh, of course. Yeah. You're going to see all third world countries go into an economic stagnation.
But the thing is China has had out of control growth, and now they have so many different factors that
you had the out of control growth because you had an influence of not only Chinese investors going overseas and essentially fucking over their own country in order to gain, billions of dollars. But you also had an influx of, that authoritarian capitalism. You're going to see the stagnation because it's no longer in that, boom cycle after Deng.
And also the real estate market is bust too.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, looking at this, you see these places like Russia, which has seen after Soviet Union a steady decrease in standards of living.
Oh yeah, definitely.
An extremely high rate of prostitution, or increasing rate of prostitution, poverty, unemployment, inflation, cultural instability that you have under this. So essentially, what you're trading in. By giving this, and I'm no way condoning the USSR or Mao, but you're seeing, just as this system transforms, a general decrease in almost everything, especially in relation to standards of living.
I want to say something, by the way. When I mean authoritarian systems, I'm not necessarily just talking about like not really having democracy, but more having like a one-state party or whatever, or someone in power. Like you can see this in Russia, Putin being in power for like 20 years.
That's a de facto one-state party, basically.
Yeah, exactly. The democratic system is completely fucked over. Like there's on The Economist, there's like a democracy index, and they're like on a 2 or 3. Another country like United States would be like an 8, like 9 or 10 or whatever, or Sweden would be like a 9. So they're not at all like democratic. China is like literally one party state. But what I mean is more also is the control of information and media, and also identitarian politics. If you look in Russia, there's been massive discrimination towards homosexual people, and clearly you can see that Christian religion has been massively favored by the government.
Because Russia is somewhat of an orthodox.
It's an orthodox, but a lot of these things tends to be looked over.
A good thing to point out, talking about this, is the now imperialist China expanding into
into Africa.
China's trying to circumvent their loss of manufacture, since a lot of their manufacturing is going to Vietnam, India, and different other cheaper places. So what they're doing is they're building plants and financing infrastructure in other countries so that they can still be ahead of the curve.
China,
and they don't have to be dependent just on their own country alone.
I think as you see China, you're seeing an entirely different
way of ruling the world, kind of like how the U.S. does with military, except China does with economy.
China does this as in a completely neo-colonial, economic domination way.
Yeah.
They're willing to, you see China. I'm not saying that they're willing, as in people are actually oh yeah, we're gonna do this, but no, you see business owners that are willing to screw over their own workers, and then go into other countries, maintain the screw over
right.
their workers.
Latin America just kicked out a lot of the Chinese companies.
Yeah, Latin America has actually been on a pretty stable track. Well, everywhere besides Brazil.
Well, are you just saying that partially because of the whole pink revolution and socialists rising up there too?
In where? I don't.
Well, there's a pink revolution where there's a lot of socialist leaders who took power in Latin America. I don't know. I was just figuring since you were communist, you kind of like some of that.
Well, I mean, I think Latin socialists, Latin American socialists, have a lot of issues. They usually fall under the Bolivarian kind of system, which is.
The thing is, finances a lot of the right wing groups over there, so I kind of end up being more supportive of the socialists because if there's a right wing leader there, if there's a right wing leader there, they're probably working for American interests too, anyways.
Oh, yeah, and I mean,
Food by the CIA.
Yeah, but I mean, you see, even in places like Venezuela, you see.
My God.
Just a good example of like how leftists or quote unquote leftists in South America are pretty perverted. You see Venezuela, which is cited as being leftist.
Well, once Venezuela lost Chavez too, I think it kind of lost the direction he was trying to push.
Well, I mean, you also see the mass warehousing and good withholding that companies have been doing, where they're just not selling items. You have things being created in factories, and they're just not selling them in Venezuela.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like these people.
Well, I think Chavez was trying to do a economy where it's more of a barter economy rather than using currency. He was using goods and bartering with other countries for different goods.
Well, no. Chavez's whole thing was, reforming, or using social reform to control the means of production, which eventually led to this, hyperinflation and issues like that. And I think it's important. And I just want to point this out because a lot of people forget it, and it's completely off topic. But no matter what people say, there is legitimate and very justified opposition to Maduro in Venezuela, both from extremely more liberal communists like you have anarchists, and from people in general. The situation in Venezuela is absolutely shit, and that's from something that was doomed to fail in the beginning.
I think Maduro might also be kind of like Rousseff was in Brazil. Rousseff pulled back a lot of the foreign investment that Brazil had that was kind of growing Brazil's economy and sort of using somewhat of a similar strategy to China. And Maduro, I think, is screwing a lot of things up with foreign policy because I'm from a Guyanese background. Guyana borders Venezuela, and under Chavez, there was a lot of positive relations between the two. But now Maduro is fighting Guyana over oil rights in the water, so it's probably not even just an economic issue. And I had a friend who even foreign policy wise as well. And I had a friend who lived in Venezuela, and a lot of the police are basically they say like driving away the middle class and the upper class because anytime there's protests, they're using a lot of violence against the people.
I mean, isn't that very common though?
Well, hold on. I mean, they're using a lot of violence against the people. But you have to realize that you see the same thing. I mean, you see people hanging up wires to behead biker cops in Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not like this one. It's not necessarily a one-sided police versus people thing. It's kind of the same thing like in Ukraine, where you have both sides being absolutely shitty people. With only one side getting actually blamed for it. I mean, you do see a lot of police brutality, and I mean, I'm not going to say that it's justified, but it's obviously understandable to maintain control of something like this. But it's in
the system in Venezuela. The system in Venezuela is obviously not going to work. Obviously, something's going to probably happen there at some point.
Yeah.
Bolivarianism is not.
I think
it is doomed to fail.
I mean, Peronism just failed in one of those South American countries, wasn't it? Was it either Chile or Argentina?
Oh, what did you say?
I think it was Argentina.
I didn't hear you.
Sorry.
What did you say? The ideology?
Oh, wait, was that me or?
Yeah, you.
You talking about?
Yeah, you.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying because Peronism was another one of those Latin American ideologies which just failed in Argentina, and they just had one of their first non-Peronist presidents, I believe.
Again, like what I think, especially like the police issue, like we're seeing things that are similar to something like a police state, and I think these are all just symptoms of an authoritarian state trying to maintain power. And we see that like
You said this was an authoritarian socialist state, though.
yeah, of course, but you see that like in Brazil, that they basically what they do in Brazil, what they do in the
Brazil-
Philippines,
Brazil
they kill people.
Yeah.
That's what
Well,
they
yeah. Brazil. Well, yeah. Well, Duarte, that's it's a drug story, and that's more.
Yeah,
I'd probably say.
it's the same in Brazil too. They kill people.
There's a new administration in Brazil from a different party. I think it's more of the capitalist party. Usually it's the Communist Party that was in power in Brazil. I mean, they're not actually communists; they're just called the Communist Party.
Yeah, but it's an authoritarian government.
Lula was a pretty good ruler, and yeah, it probably was probably somewhat authoritarian. A lot of countries outside of the U.S. are going to be, and Western countries are going to tend to be authoritarian. But I was just going to say that the Rousseff administration had probably some of the hallmarks of authoritarian capitalism, because one of the main gas companies there, I think there was some sort of corruption between one of the major oil companies there and the administration in power.
Yeah, like before I like continue on the rant, I just want to say, not necessarily it doesn't have to be anything wrong with an authoritarian system, especially like in an area like Africa. An example for that would be maybe Libya with Gaddafi. Like there is actually support from a lot of leftists that think that it wasn't that he was the greatest leader or whatever, but when he got taken down and killed by the United States, things got worse, and he actually did some things that wasn't that bad in comparison to other possible regimes. So, but the point is that I think in every other part of the world, democracy is generally preferable, and decentralized systems in general, especially on a power level, is preferable to most people. And like what I think, and this is something that I wanted to get into the discussion earlier, but like aside from identitarian politics and like more the removal of it from the discussion, you can still debate about culture and crime or whatever, but it's more of the meta that I think people are criticizing. I think there are a lot of talking points for left and right. There's like on a very basic level, you can like where they can collaborate. If you look at United States, for example, one thing that would be obvious if you want to have a more democratic system is to remove money out of politics, remove lobbying, make it easier to vote. Like all these things, they should be pretty obvious to anyone who wants to have like democracy.
To do that. I think he wants to wrap. Oh, sorry.
Oh, so no, just very quickly. I feel like looking at these countries, Brazil, Venezuela, Libya, the issues in those countries, and especially Brazil, the issues in these countries are so deeply rooted into corruption and the system that itself that it can only be solved by an absolute system change.
Yeah, but like, isn't that inherent to like the authoritarian systems, though? Like corruption.
You're gonna see corruption inherently in those systems.
So like, and like, I really want to point this out though. Like, there's a lot of people that say, well, anarchists on both economical sides can collaborate. I don't necessarily think that is possible. However, I think there's something that we could all strive for. Yeah, of course, is like to promote democracy. Otherwise, we actually might be moving towards something that is very similar to China, not necessarily in Europe or in America, but I'm saying that if we do not hold very tight onto these more decentralized power systems, then we might be moving towards something very, very unfamiliar and
more
very
like authoritarian.
Yeah, and I think also one thing that most people would agree on is that regardless of culture or like crime statistics or whatever, if you're a leftist with a welfare state, you probably don't want that much immigration. If you're a free market economist, you probably want a lot of immigration. What we do want is objectivity. Have way less like public service. Maybe should be completely removed.
Immigration from people who are going to work, which is generally the U.S. That's pretty strict. You have to be people who are actually going to.
Hold on. I think that you don't necessarily have to have people to work, or to definitively work to make that profitable.
Wait, to make what profitable?
To make immigration.
Make immigration profitable.
No, exactly. You don't have to make it profitable. It is just that under certain systems.
What I really meant was you don't have to necessarily have to have them working in order to make them profitable. You can look
I see what you're saying.
You can look at places with refugee camps that are privately owned, or areas that are privately owned that refugees are housed, and they're getting profits from the government to keep these. I'd like to really move on to the recent fights over lefty pole and pole.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'm gonna preface, I'm not hip on this.
Yeah.
So prepare for some cold takes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but I think that as you see this political climate rise, especially around the world and immigration and all that, recently we've seen numerous attempts to get videos mass flagged and taken down. I mean, you have entire YouTube.
Holy shit! Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have Batco the Anarchist, one of the biggest left YouTubers being mass
Seriously?
flagged.
I make songs for the guy, and like his videos has been taken down, like not only by Disney but like by these mass flaggings, and like it's really disheartening. I put a lot of work into that, him too.
And you see these things being taken down, and I view this as both predictable and petty at the same time.
Yeah.
I feel like obviously the two ideologies here, whatever. But it's important to note that this is just, or what's happened is just kind of unprecedentedly unneeded. I mean...
Yeah, like, it's just trolls being retarded. Like, they are predictable in the sense that, yeah, sooner or later this shit was going to happen, especially seeing, Black Pigeon Speaks releasing a video, causing all of the drama, calling them a bunch of like cocks or whatever, and there's always been like a dispute between Pole and Lefty Pole and them wanting to remove the site, but like there are exactly, it is a pretty petty issue really, even though it sucks for content creators. It's like it's for the community to manage. This is not like a systematical thing, or it is actually, by the way. If you look at YouTube, what they did, they made it possible to do this thing. Like it's kind of funny, like the theme of authoritarianism. Like what they did was that they gave all these kinds of toxic communities, like third wave feminist groups that wanted to mass flag videos that they found sexist or whatever. Paul, like we have people like Paul Joseph Watson and all of these people. They say that they're gonna get out of a job because of the system changes towards YouTube.
You also see the, like you said, not friendly for advertisers. But I mean, I think as you see with YouTube and just in general, you do see this rise of censorship for profit. And really looking at it, both with Pole and with Lefty Pole, I think this collaboration is an example of how not to be absolutely petty over ideological differences. And I think that with how aggressive these things have been in terms of like videos and channels being deleted and whatever, it would be so much easier just to like not do this and not be petty over these things, especially like
but like people
even from the like, and I'm not trying to like fanboy or like be like defensive about it, but I mean even Lefty Pole, you've seen the same attitude, which is kind of shit, honestly. Oh, you see the same attitude, hostility, when I mean, all you're doing by getting into these petty internet fights is putting yourself at risk to lose your audience and content that you create. And I think that goes without saying, but I still think that's extremely dumb to be actually, doing things over. I mean, it's the definition of an internet LARP.
But like, I want to say this though, like of course, it's preferable for everyone to not do this shit. But again, it's the internet, it's internet trolls. They're gonna do this. It's pretty predictable. It sucks, but if you look at it from like why are people doing this? Also, it's because they can. And if you look at YouTube, the different policies they implemented, it's possible to do this now. So they exploit it and they just have fun with it. Maybe as a protest, maybe as a well, just like fucking with people. But like what I'm more concerned with, as you know, why I like to start that whole Leftynet thing, is how do we actually like unite people and like do shit that isn't just retarded shit posting and not that there's anything wrong with shit posting, but trolling and like just causing harm and not doing anything productive. Um, like besides that, like collaborating together, like what is at the core of all this is more what I'm concerned with. Is it just like YouTube or like companies being companies? I think actually it really boils down to people not necessarily like going against like these kinds of policies being implemented. And it's just like YouTube being this way is just a result out of like years and years and years out of making these kinds of websites unprofitable, having Google, a bunch of conglomerates purchasing them, and like one major contributor, I think, they don't have to be directly related, but if you look at the thing of net neutrality, which I've known about for like years, Trump being pro, like anti-net neutrality, he wants to control information. It's very logical that he would want to do that. He's done it through like the scientific community. There's all kinds of reasons. Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons, and like of course
it's because he's a part of an intensely bureaucratic administration that is like more openly in bed with just high capitalist interests than I think we've seen since fucking Reagan. Like to the point where he's just openly like, we're just gonna remove all this shit on climate change because I just hired an oil executive for fucking like the energy department or whatever he did. Like not even trying to hide it. Okay, so in my home state, Pennsylvania, there is a big thing that a lot of people are. It's a polarizing issue, and that's the issue of fracking. And fracking is a way to get natural gas out of the ground rather efficiently. As an environmentalist, I'm opposed to it, but I understand that it's efficient. I understand why people are interested in it. But when it comes to like terms of environmental justice, it's just simply not a good solution. Oftentimes what happens is, it's just an incredibly annoying and cumbersome process to live next to, and I have lived next to it, and it sucks. And of course the companies don't care about it. And there were leaks a few years ago that have continued coming out showing which of the state's politicians are being paid off by these gas companies, like this conglomerate of gas companies, and it's every single one. But here, they are much more discreet about it. They don't just like it's not that Trump is being oblivious when he does this, when he is being forward about censorship and being forward about control to an ulterior interest. It's just that the link is clear to see, whereas the average citizen of Pennsylvania won't really be able to notice what's going on that their politicians are doing that would enable the gas companies to take the action they want to.
Like what it comes down to is that it's just controlling information, and like why they're doing this is very simple. Like it's why every other like semi-authoritarian government or regime or whatever does it, is that it works. Like people and like politicians, they are pragmatists. They lie if they have to in order to make policies or maintain power. Like obviously there's going to be corruption, obviously there's going to be all kinds of like retarded shit going on, but like the only way to oppose this kind of like I wouldn't call it even pragmatism, but like more populism and like controlling information is to like regardless of what your economical side is, or regardless of what your political standpoint is and like your ideology. I think if you are for any kind of like decentralized system, if you are for democracy, then I think it's absolute like everyone's interest to be like participating in this kind of like there's not a lot of it, but I'd say WikiLeaks when Hillary Clinton got like all her emails got leaked. What happens there was that people wanted to have the freedom of information, and there's all kinds of like emancipatory projects going on, but they're not really effective. If anything, what's ironic about it is that this project of WikiLeaks, what they did was that it caused a chain reaction of politicians having control of information, thereby having control over what kind of like what people are going to vote for, with lobbying, having politics and money. I mean, it's pretty clear how he got into power just through policies or whatever. He had a lot of money, and like these are real issues, and like people from both sides of the spectrum can collaborate on those parts. And generally, why I want to talk to like all kinds of people, like capitalists, liberals, or whatever, is that these are not impossible things to achieve. It's very like we're not going against like conglomerates here. It's more how do we, I guess, like it's kind of a weird thing to take for granted, but like how do we raise awareness about obvious shit like this?
Right.
And we had the Young Turks that wanted to do the what was it, the Justice Democrats, and that's what they wanted to do. Like they wanted to have something that would be an accurate representation of like progressivism in America, not like socialism or whatever Cenk calls it. This
The
idiot.
thing is, it's hard because like the whole like when it comes to moving forward and thinking about like what you'd want to do, the whole I saw that it was this funny joke on Twitter, like the neoliberal slogan is just better things aren't possible.
I mean,
Because
I am a pessimist, but Jesus
they're
Christ.
because they're obsessed. Well, I mean, you may be a pessimist, but your ideology is based in revolution, right? But their ideology is based in, oh well, yeah, let's do a cost benefit analysis on this and see if it's really possible. Oh, it doesn't look very good. I don't think we're going to make money off of this. Oh God.
Yeah, like if people would just take the potential they put into like the Bernie Bros, the people on poll, doing these kinds of autistic information gatherings of the emails and all these kinds of emancipatory projects, if they would collaborate on things like this, we would see a difference. Like it's not impossible. Because we are facing something that could be very horrible, and that would be probably something like authoritarian capitalism. And it's not that there is necessarily anything wrong, although like obviously a lot of left-wing people would disagree, but I'm saying maybe there isn't a better alternative that is realistic. And at least if that is the case, then we want to maintain democracy, because what follows in authoritarian governments is oppression and all kinds of identitarian nightmares.
The poll people are always going to attack the lefty poll people on, the lefty poll people will always attack the poll people on ID poll topics. Like I know one of the video series is sometimes I keep up with, just because sometimes it's a little funny. I know it's a poll humor, but it, and it indoctrinates a lot of people. Obviously, is the Murdoch and Murdoch series, and I know lefty poll recently rated that, and that's kind of obvious. That's always going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we covered most of it. I think we had a lot of interesting discussions. I got to mention pretty much everything that I wanted to say. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, or anyone else wanted to add before we round this up?
I was just gonna. Well, you can go first.
I mean, just on the whole lefty poll split, and like how we were talking earlier about like the classical liberal rationalist people, that party being swung one way or the other toward an extreme. And I wanted to bring up the topic of why do you think more of those people aren't turned toward the far left? Like, why do you think they would be more drawn to the right wing side of things? Because I mean, even when you go to like the like alt light, it seems like if you tweaked a few parts of their ideology, they would be socialists essentially. Like they're not very far removed. They're not the same thing. I'm not being one of those dweebs, but like the thing is the core emotion isn't very different, and I just wonder why there isn't.
Wait, who are you asking, by the way? Like,
Just, I don't know, in general.
yeah, like generally, what I think is good is to be very honest about your opinions. Like, objectivity is probably impossible. Decentralized systems are generally unrealistic. We're probably not going to see an anarchist revolution in any part of the world. Unfortunately, like it would be nice to see a society without hierarchies, and it can maybe be an ideal. But I think the horseshoe theory is definitely not viable. What I do think is that if people truly value democracy, then we will not have people like Donald Trump in the future. That's what I think. I think this was more of an emancipatory
But I mean,
project.
but who would you have though? There's not too many other options outside of Donald Trump. There's really Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump. They're
Yeah.
both kind of authoritarian. So
What I'm saying is
Mhm.
that there's going to be changes to the system. That's the ideal. People don't want. I think a lot of people see a lot of the issues with the American democratic system, and it's not just in America; it's in Europe too.
Probably.
And this could
we could see parties splitting maybe.
Yeah, I mean, one of these examples would be the Young Turks, Justice Democrats. They're probably not going to achieve anything, but and like Bernie Sanders too wanted to make some significant changes to the system.
He kind
by,
of sold out though.
Yeah. So
Yeah, of course he did. But like they're not.
I kind of disagree a little bit on the whole bureaucracy thing because I know Trump did, kind of ride the coattails of fossil fuel company executives. That was kind of obvious, but he did remove some of the bureaucracy or make moves towards that.
Yeah,
You could disagree with me on that. You could say to me that was pandering. I'm sure you could attack it from both sides, but yeah.
No, I think that was a prerequisite that people wanted some sort of like emancipation from the establishment or whatever.
Right.
But I think like it's just a symptom. I think people want something different. Is why a lot of people voted for Bernie Sanders. I'm not saying everyone want like something like a socialist utopia or whatever. I'm saying that people are not content. That's why they're not voting.
Right.
And like they agree when Donald Trump say the system is rigged.
Also, I think Paul is a mixture of so many different people with so many different views. Not all of them are going to be pro-democracy. In fact, I'm sure there's going to be a few that are fascist. There's some that are cultural nationalist. So I mean, they're all over the place. I don't really know if you can really unite a ununited bloc like Paul with lefty Paul in the first place. But
I mean, like looking at just unite the right, I think there's a lot of disagreements, not economically. But
and those are only the far right. Those aren't even the regular rights.
Yeah.
And you look now. Like after it's ended, everything's all said and done. They're all disavowing each other. Like fucking Richard Spencer comes out, he's like, "Oh no, I don't actually like the Nazis." And you were just marching with them 5 minutes ago.
There's a war between Anglin and Duke also, and I don't even know if Spencer's even part of that because kind of everybody on both sides, all sides kind of just hate Spencer. Doesn't really matter what side you are.
I do have a question like that I didn't answer or then that I didn't ask earlier in the beginning before we round off, unless someone else has something else entirely. But like on this topic of like unite the right and etc. Do you guys actually think, and like this is something that I've seen on a lot of social media, is that there is some war approaching from like seeing the rise of like right-wing identitarian
We
politics.
could make a whole podcast on this. I do believe that we're headed for World War III. I believe it's going to come out of
No.
Germany at some point.
I don't mean war
Oh.
as in like,
Oh.
global scale war. I'm talking
Oh,
like,
okay.
is there going to be like, major conflicts between Antifa, like lefty pole,
yeah.
IRL
I
battle?
think so.
You
I
think
think
so,
so.
right?
Wait,
I
can
think
I read a...
I think we're kind of at a Weimar Germany or a sort of 1960s sort of battle between right and left groups. That's what I sort of think.
Maybe. Like, I'm generally, I don't know. I think we'll just have to see, really. There's so much confusion, but it was refreshing talking to someone about it.
I just wanted to mention a few last things. I'm just going to mention. I'm not going to actually like ask or anything. I'm just going to mention that on the whole Ukraine thing, I tend to side with Russia, just because I don't want Ukraine being pushed towards the European Union. I just want to mention on Gaddafi. I actually supported Gaddafi.
Oh.
Being in power there, because I felt he kind of helped the whole, with the whole migration thing not becoming a big issue. And I think that the United Nations kind of has a puppet government set up, and then the other general who's in Libya, and I think the UN is controlling the Tobruk government, and the other government's being controlled by a general, I think, in Tripoli, and I think that general wants Gaddafi's son to retake over the country, which I'm supportive, and a lot of people on the right are actually supportive. As you know, a lot of people on the right are also supportive of Assad. And then last year I was also going to mention, although I'm a cultural nationalist, I don't agree with Gavin McKenna's type cultural nationalists. I don't believe the Western culture is superior. I just believe that, if you're living in the West, you should support Western culture. I don't believe you should say that any culture is superior. That's all I really wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that was pretty transparent, which was good. I think I learned a lot more about that than I would previously have known. Sometimes I
Right.
have these like misconceptions about what people believe, but it was pretty aligned with what I previously thought. So yeah, I really enjoy this.
I mean, I don't think I'm the most like right wing person to have.
I think you represent a majority of people. Most people are not this extreme, like ethno-nationalist, and
That's
like
true.
the more alt-right, like Lawrence Southern pandering type of community. I think you.
I wouldn't say I'm for Lauren Southern. I think she sort of represents a block right between the alt-right and alt-right. But I'd say like Paul Joseph Watson sort of people.
Yeah, exactly. Paul Joseph Watson. So yeah,
some people and between
the
them,
Brick Boys.
Yeah.
book
But yeah,
eaters.
I really enjoy this. Thanks for joining in on this collaboration, and maybe we can do this in the future as well.
Well, we've done it. We've done it once before. This is not the first Leftynet collab that I've done. We've done one before. And it was also nice getting a Swedish perspective. I don't remember if you were on the last one. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was great having you guys from Leftynet here too. I don't know if that many people from our side joined. I think maybe one person from our side had joined. I think Andy.
Yeah, we're gonna link your channel in the description, and
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully we'll do this in the future.
So yeah, this has been a collab between the Leftynet podcast and the Real Talk with Frank and Vishy podcast. And everyone have a great night.
Thank you for listening to the Leftynet podcast. This is Grouch, your editor, and I will leave you with a bit of labor wave, actually. Bye bye.